Hi, Andrew. As you say, we are in Copenhagen, joined by George Soros. We're talking about climate change and how the rich countries can help the poor countries adapt to climate change and do it. Mr. Soros, you've got a new proposal for the rich countries to do it in a way that wouldn't affect their balance sheets. Tell us about that.
That's right. What is on the table right now is a $10 billion fund for 3 years, and I think this could be more than doubled, using the special drawing rights that were distributed in September of this year to all the members of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the rich countries that are, let's say, United States or the members of the ECB, Britain, etc., Japan, they really have no use for these funds because they carry an interest if you use them. So it's not a very good thing to do. And you also have to repay them eventually. So they're just in the shop window idle. And they could lend them to set up a fund, a special green fund, which would, let's say, lend them for 25 years, $100 billion out of the 150 that they received, and that would then be used for climate investment in the developing world.
Let me ask you about that, because you say they have no use, but we've just emerged from the biggest financial crisis, at least since World War II, right? Yeah. We've got huge concerns about sovereign risk, right now in the news in Greece, in Spain. Yeah. Are you sure of that? I mean, what if we get a double-dip disaster?
Absolutely, because the credibility of the Federal Reserve and the ECB is good enough to provide all the guarantees that they need. And in fact, what has happened after the Lehman default, the developed world basically guaranteed that no other defaults will take place. And that guarantee was good. Right. But the developing world could not give similar guarantees. And that's why there was a sudden outflow of capital from Eastern Europe back to the center.
How would this affect gold? Because the market makes certain assumptions about what the IMF is going to do with the gold it sits on. Right. Including it's expecting it to slowly sell it off. Right. So you're changing the assumptions.
But yes, what I'm proposing is that the IMF should use its gold reserve to guarantee that loan, so that there is a precedent. Just in September, Britain and France lent $2 billion of their SDRs to the IMF, and the IMF then assumed responsibility both for the principal and the interest, and that fund went into concessional lending to the least developed world. So what was done for $4 billion could be done for $100 billion, yeah. And that would work.
And how would this affect the diversification away from the dollar? Because we have countries like China that have suggested that they would look at using these SDRs, the very ones that you're talking about, changing the function of from a liquidity tool to a financing tool, to diversify themselves away from the dollar. So how would this change that picture?
Well, it would put these SDRs more into circulation. So to that extent, it would make them more active. But the SDRs are not a currency, and it's in no way is it a rival to the dollar, because it's not a currency.
You're talking about changing the remit of the IMF at the end of the day. You've talked to countries about this. Tell me about those discussions and whether you think you're going to get any traction on this idea.
On this
on the idea of using SDRs.
Yes. Look, basically, I talked to a lot of financial office officials, and basically they say this is doable. they're not eager to do it, and particularly the United States has a big problem because you would need congressional approval. That's very difficult to get and very painful. Otherwise, I'm sure the Obama administration would be out there leading on this issue. As it is, they are very reluctant, and that's why it's very important that there should be public pressure, that this is really needed, it would be useful. We have to recognize that climate change is a real threat, and we really need to do something about it, and investing in rainforests and forestry and agriculture actually offer the greatest scope for carbon savings. And this is what you would be investing this fund in.
I'm sure you're well aware there's a school of thought that the developed nations can't, because of the financial crisis that we just went through, I mean, you've said this yourself, can't really afford to do a lot. And there's a school of thought that they shouldn't, because the biggest growth in emissions is going to come from the developing world. And quite frankly, you know, skeptics will say that the money, the savings, is in Asia to pay for these green technologies, not in the North and the West. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that the Indians, for instance, argue that all the pollution that's in the air came from the developed countries, and therefore they want to be given a free pass to in the future. So there is a constant dispute. And